All right, welcome to the podcast today, guys. It's just Jazz and I here today. Nicole's not with us, but she's going to be back on the podcast for our next episode. And today, Jazz and I are going to be talking about denialism, which is something I didn't know it meant.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dramatic lead in to talk about something dramatic. Like it. A little disclaimer for the beginning of the episode. We're going to be talking about some things addressing mental health today. So just note that this is not a replacement for therapy or this is not clinical, medical, or mental health advice either. And that goes for our episodes in general. But denialism, whenever we talk about it, this episode is in thanks to Papa Brack, because he gave me an article that addressed one of our earlier episodes. Do you remember the episode that we talked about the Native American residential schools in Canada and then touched on the ones in America too?
I know. Season 1.
OG. Yeah, it might have been our first episode.
I think that was the first episode you guys might have. First or second one I remember listening to for sure.
I think because I know we had like an introductory episode and then that might have been our next one. So that was like really a throwback. And my dad listened to that episode and then found this article in Leaven magazine, which is it's a Catholic magazine. And he found an article called Truth and Denialism in the Church. And it was talking about how the Catholic Church in Canada needs to face their history of these like cultural atrocities that they've committed instead of denying them. And I appreciated that came from a Catholic magazine because I feel like that's, you never really know how that's going to be handled. So I was appreciating that someone was calling them out a little bit.
Little recognition.
Yes. But the article just talked a lot about, it explained denialism, just saying that it's any way to focus on a specific isolated event that casts doubt basically on what the article was talking about, casting doubt on the residential schools. And he was talking about denialism being, something like, well, some of the pictures from the kids in the school, the kids are like running around and smiling and playing. So that means that it was all okay and that this is being blown out of proportion and that, I don't know, just kind of trying to cast doubt on how horrible it was, what was actually happening.
Using specific things to really twist the story to like make it towards something it wasn't, just so it could prove a better narrative.
Yes, exactly. So it's basically just trying to find any kind of way that you can cast doubt on it. And do you have the actual definition that might help?
So the one I have from Merriam-Webster, denialism, the practice of denying the existence, truth, or validity of something despite proof or strong evidence that it is real, true, or valid.
Perfect. Yes, I love that. Right. And so whenever people are able to kind of cast that doubt, like you said, it disrupts the whole narrative of the situation, even though there might be even if there's like an amount of truth in the thing that they're saying, it still is just causing this fracture in what the whole narrative is supposed to be of the whole, like of whatever story or whatever historical event is being talked about. And it doesn't even have to be just historical events. That's just what this article is referring to. And I thought that was so interesting because I think that we see a lot of that still today with a bunch of things. I don't know. Whenever you were learning about it, did you think of anything? Like what came to your mind?
Yeah, there was tons of stuff. And even researching, like there was some stuff it's kind of crazy. When you start thinking of something and then your phone starts showing you things.
Oh yeah. Super.
So creepy. That's what happened where I don't have a TikTok. I'm not hip.
I don't have TikTok either. Also not hip.
Too old. But what popped up online for me was crazy. It was just talking about this thing on TikTok where I don't know what it was, a trend or something. I don't know what was going on, but it was basically talking about how like the younger generation going through schools not the schools themselves teaching these kids, but that these younger kids just don't believe Anne Frank was a person.
Oh,
Like, and that came up. And then I was looking online where it's like, there's tons of denialism around the Holocaust. And just that for me was not something that I ever knew about because it just never crossed my mind to deny something like that.
right.
But then seeing that, how it's like, there's a whole generation. And then it was a bunch of parents. I don't know if it was the kids or the parents on TikTok doing this, but discussing it and just saying like, where's this information even coming from? For like this, like a whole mass group
Yes.
of people to believe Anne Frank didn't exist, the Holocaust is fake, and something like that. I feel like for some people it's just like a joke, whatever. And it's like that does a lot of damage to deny what a large group of people went through, something extremely traumatizing.
Right.
And you're just denying that ever happened.
Right. Millions of people died. Yeah.
Yes.
And we're just acting like that didn't happen.
Huge. Yeah. And so that was something where I'm like, what? There are people out there who believe this. And then stuff in my mind where I'm like, I know people didn't believe, like a lot of people denying climate change. Like that's something that to me was very like, that's a big one. That's one I know. So there's ones that shook me. I was shocked about.
I'm shook.
I'm shook. Yeah, I'm still hip.
Maybe you should join TikTok.
So there was some stuff that did shock me to know that like there's mass collective groups that don't believe in, and other stuff where I'm like, okay, I've been known there's been this fight as far as believing the information and believing the facts.
Yes, exactly. And actually, so I'm glad that you mentioned that, because this article even talked about the Holocaust, because it said that there's a long history of denialism in reference to the Holocaust and other like mass genocides and crimes against humanity. And it's unfathomable, I think, that people can deny that. But then I also think that that's, like you said, it's harmful whenever we don't face the realities of those situations, as painful as those realities are, right? I mean, it's painful. And I had actually, I knew that there was some Holocaust deniers out there. I feel like it's the same thing as like flat earthers. Like, there's science that proves the earth is, there's pictures then science and things that prove the earth is not flat. It's round.
It's round.
It's a sphere.
That's what's the most wild part to me, is where I'm like, where did this information come from? And then how did it spread so much that there is just massive amounts of people? And that's the big thing with denialism, is that it's about a collective, not just one individual.
Speak more of that. What do you mean?
So like with like being in denial. So like if you're in denial, that's kind of like, that's just with you within the self. Like I'm in denial. Now I can't think of something, but
I'm in denial that I need to stop watching as much Netflix.
Yes. I'm in denial about my Netflix habits. That's just within the self. But denialism is about this collective, like mass groups of people coming together to say something's not true. And so that's why I wonder, I'm like, how does something spread this much to where people believe, like the earth is flat, or that the Holocaust never existed, or trying to think of other ones. Or there was an article I read, and it was talking about, I need to find it. It was a specific president in Africa during a certain time period. And he didn't believe about AIDS causing HIV, that there was any correlation. There was this mass denialism that spread. And because of this, they weren't doing the healthcare that was needed. They were kind of dismissing everything. And let me try to find the numbers, because the amount of people that died because of this is just very sad and unfortunate. So denialism, it's something it's manifested on a very large scale.
Right. Man, that's a good example of how harmful that can be.
Oh, here it is. So it was a South African president who was in office between 1999 to 2008. And he himself was influenced by AIDS denialist. And so because he denied this link between HIV and AIDS and didn't even believe that HIV existed, these programs weren't implemented, the I can't remember what it's called, like antiretroviral drugs didn't happen. It was estimated that it costed the lives of 330,000 people.
Sheesh.
because of this. So, and that's the thing, denialism isn't just oh, well, it's someone's opinion, whatever. It's like it has real effects and consequences.
Right. And man, president until 2008. It's just crazy to me that it's like, that's modern age. Like we had, I mean, I know that AIDS
of our time.
HIV, yes. Like I know that all like AIDS and everything happened in our time too, but it's just, I mean, it wasn't even like the 80s or something, not saying that that's that much longer ago, but it's just like, that is so recent and we're still doubting things that are
the advance of medicine
tangible.
and research.
Oh, and with it, like having those real consequences. And I mean, that has like very real consequences that unfold. I mean, like you said, 330,000 people, it unfolded kind of based off of that. And I think, I mean, whenever we think about Holocaust or like the residential schools, the denialism in that, it's not necessarily that people are dying as a result of that directly, but I also think that that contributes to just like, well, anti-Semitism or like Native American history and culture and the awareness that goes into that, or not addressing like the trauma that came from that, not making reparations. You know, I think that there are those consequences that kind of unfold from those events.
Yeah. Casting like a whole group of people as, oh, they're just liars. And it's like, what does someone have to gain to like lie about something like this? Like,
right. Also, like, did you ever see that meme that was like the people who think that COVID was like arranged and organized by world leaders never worked on a group project with someone, because nothing is this coordinated. Nothing is this well coordinated. Like, that's what I was just thinking, like the people who deny the Holocaust, and it's just like millions of people have attested to it and like like given testimonies and facts and evidence, and it's just like, how? Have you ever worked on a group project before?
The people are there. There's written stories. The places exist. Like you can see them.
Yeah, you can go to Auschwitz. Yeah.
Like you said, unfathomable.
Yes, exactly. And I think that that's part of the interesting thing that I wanted to think about whenever we were researching this and wanting to talk about it, is just like, why do these things happen? Because I think we obviously see the effects of it happens, and then it also is harmful and causes this misdirection of people not taking responsibility for things, not taking responsibility for themselves, not having justice. But I also think, so like, why do we do this? And I was thinking, it's so hard for us to process big, horrible tragedies. You know, I think it brings up, even if we didn't have a part in it, I mean, I'm part German and I'm part Jewish, so I feel like it's hard for me to really like reference the Holocaust much, but it's like, okay, the part of me that's German. It's not that I necessarily feel guilty for the Holocaust, but it's also hard for me to wrap my mind around how many people died. And so I think it's hard to face those tragedies sometimes. And I think it's almost like your brain kind of comes up with ways of like, nope, that's uncomfortable. Like, we don't want to go there.
Just coping. That was one thing I couldn't find about denialism, but then I was like looking smaller and like, well, why are we in denial in general? And that's kind of exactly what you were saying, where it's like, it's coping. Like you can't deal with it, so you just don't.
Exactly. And I think it kind of has to start on like that level of denial, right? It has to start with those few individuals that feel so guilty and helpless about a situation that they don't know what to do. And I feel like it's seeking out those like little itty bitty outliers or exceptions to what happened and pointing to them and being like, no, look, see, this happened. So this means that the rest of it is false. And it's kind of holding that, and like what you found can be valid in the way that, yes, that happened. And it can also be true that tons of children died at the hands of the church and the government, right? Like you can have the picture of the kids smiling, and that happened, right? Like I'm not going to deny that that didn't happen. And we can also admit to the fact that like there was a ton of wrongs committed in all of this.
Yeah, they both can exist in the same space. And that's what's hard, where people will just want to use their one narrative and that's the story. It's like, well, we can acknowledge that there is that existence in the same space, but that's the thing, you have to acknowledge all of it.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. Like, let's acknowledge the whole picture instead of just the picture you're comfortable looking at. Which is like, I mean, and that's, oh, you said this something about this earlier, like, how does this spread? And I was thinking like the internet. Did you ever watch, there was like the NBA player who believed that the earth was flat, and he was saying he just like found a YouTube video and watched it and kind of just like went down this rabbit hole, and there was just so much evidence, that he thought was evidence, and he was just watching video upon video upon video and like seeing all of this stuff pop up on the internet, and he kind of just like engulfed himself in this world on the internet of people who put out this stuff and like got totally wrapped up in it. And I think that that's kind of what happened is we're uncomfortable, we search out something that will make us feel a little bit better, and then we get totally bombarded with those things, and we just have confirmation bias about, and I think, I'm guilty of confirmation bias. I'm not trying to point fingers here. Like, I think all of us do it to a certain level.
I didn't even think about that term, but you're right. That's totally what it is. It's just confirmation bias of, let me just find something that fits what I want it to be. And
Yes.
boom, I found it. And that's the thing. It's fact checking. Okay, sure, you found something, but who's the source? What was the, is there the evidence behind it? Was there,
Right.
depending on what exactly it is, was there studies about it?
Mhm.
Is there research? Or it's like someone could say something, but what is the source of your information?
Right, exactly. And I think it's just not believing everything on the internet that's true.
Right? Don't believe everything you see or hear.
Right.
Question things. And that's what I saw a big thing about denialism was. They're like, step 1, debunk. Like, if something comes your way, debunk it. What is, find out the facts.
Yes, that was one of the articles I read too that said, and like the best way to face this is not to act like those things aren't being brought to your attention, or not to act like those things didn't happen, because then you're kind of also just denying their denialism, which grows it almost. I don't know. It's instead like facing it and just facing it head on, and having a conversation about that and getting down to the facts, debunking what some of those some of what their claims are, and like, I don't know, kind of getting down to like the dirt of all of it. And I think that is, we can't act like that other side doesn't exist. We can't act like people are being denialists and having these other opinions, because obviously it needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. Don't spiral into denialism.
Right. Even if it's uncomfortable to address the horrible atrocities that humankind is capable of, basically. Like, we're capable of horrible things.
Exactly. And I feel like the other harmful thing about denialism is that you don't actually get to learn from these things.
Mm-hmm.
The Holocaust is awful. Climate change is causing real repercussions, but let's learn from what happened so we don't make these mistakes again, so we don't fall down these paths. Like, to deny something, it happened and we can't change it, but like, what can we move forward and do with what has happened?
Yes, exactly. Like, what's that saying? Learn history so you don't repeat it. It's not how it goes, but basically that's what it is.
That sounded right.
But that's the point of us learning history. We want to know where we came from, and we also want to know what we should or should not do. Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it, I think is actually the saying.
That sounds about right. The doom part.
The doomed part stuck out to me. Which I feel like I should have maybe paid better attention to my history class, or should have not had the football coach be my history teacher, but here we are. I've done my own reading since then, I guess. But I think it's addressing those things and taking the responsibility for, I guess, addressing it. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Moving forward with the knowledge of it, and acknowledging that even if it's uncomfortable, we can still move forward.
I think a good modern day example, without spoilers, there's a newer movie on Netflix called Don't Look Up. And if y'all haven't watched it, watch it. But that whole movie is kind of right. I'm like, just do it. That whole movie kind of is centered around denialism and just people as a whole not wanting to face the facts, and you just kind of end up seeing what are the repercussions of something like that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly. Oh, that's what I'm doing. Sorry. I unplugged my lamp with my foot.
I was like, I see the lights.
I was like, my computer's still charging. Hang on. This is just real quick.
Difficulties.
Ah, I see the light.
Not the light.
Should I go towards it?
Don't do it.
Yeah. Oh, Don't Look Up is so good though. And yes, it's such a good example of denialism. I'm so glad you thought of that. That movie was amazing. It was so good. It was so funny and also like, oh, infuriating.
Right. I feel like that movie hit me in the feels. I can't remember which holiday it was. It was either Thanksgiving or Christmas, where it came out the day before one of those. I remember watching it, I'm like, ooh, it's got like everybody ever in it. Like, I'm like, we got Leonardo DiCaprio, we got Timothy Chalamet. And then I feel like watching it, you're like, oof, this hurts.
Yeah. Leo, no. The world, no. Stop.
It's a tough movie. It's got like good humor, so it's not all sad, but it's a message. Like, it's definitely, there's a message being said.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just, I don't know, it's really interesting watching that movie after the past couple of years, because you're kind of, I think if that movie would have come out 3 years ago, I think I would have thought that would never happen. That would never happen. And now watching this movie, I'm like, this is what will happen.
Totally. It makes you really reflect on, sadly, where we are at as a people.
Yes.
Where it's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow, the level of denialism the world's in. And it's kind of, in a way, you kind of question, is it too late? Like for us, because it's just how it seems that there's so much divide. We can't have just conversations. There's not healthy debates anymore. No one wants to listen to the other side. So it's hard because you're like, is this movie really fictional? Because it's kind of not.
Right. It's kind of very pointed. Right. But it's I don't know, it's hard to glean hope from it necessarily, but I do think it's a good wake-up call. And I think it's a wake-up call for everyone, like on both sides, because I think that's one of the most important things, is not getting caught up in sides, and versus focusing on what is in front of you and what is happening to humanity. I don't know.
I think that is a good thing about the movie, where it shows both sides. It equally makes fun of both sides of people. So it shows everyone in the good and the bad lights, and just kind of like, at the end of the day, like, it's not about you. There's a bigger picture. Like, let's get rid of the ego and just, what is the situation we're dealing with? Let's deal with it.
Right, exactly. Let's take these facts and let's figure out a game plan for them. And why is that so difficult? It's a good question.
We were all rooting for you.
I know. Man, I just totally understood they're like losing it. I like don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to spoil it for people, but I also really, really want to talk about it.
Right? Just the way it's not, I feel like you want to hope for hope in the movie, but it's just it is exactly what it is.
It is exactly what it is. I think the only thing that necessarily gave me hope from that movie was the end. And not necessarily because of what, like the events that occurred at the end, but more like
how
yes,
things were dealt with.
Yes, the relationships.
Yes.
I think is the only thing I can say gave me any hope from that movie. The rest of it was just like, man, I hope we get it together soon. That was all.
Exactly. And for those who know, you know the scene.
You know the part. Scene.
I know you were shedding tears. I was.
I was going to say, did anyone else cry? I cried. I also seem to cry at a lot of things these days, but I cried. It just happens. Oh man, that was so good. But yes, I feel like that's another just like really good example of what all this can look like. And I wanted to, so this is another example that I kind of came up with while I was reading, and I feel like this one's going to be touchier. But whenever I was reading it, I was thinking of like during the Black Lives Matters protesting and everything, how many people used Candace Owens, who is the like female Black conservative woman, who's like very outspoken. I think she's like a journalist, news reporter.
Something like that. I don't
She does
specifically know, but I do know who you're talking
something.
about. Yeah.
Yes, she does something. And I think that so many people used her, and I think it's, to me, the message was kind of like, look, she's Black and she's conservative and she's doing these, like, she thinks that BLM is like ridiculous. And I think that to me was an example of denialism, because it's kind
Yes.
of saying like, yes, that is her. She is Black. That is her opinion. And that is valid. Like, she's allowed to have that opinion. That does not disqualify or invalidate all of the other Black voices that we're hearing from. And so
Yes.
to me, I think that example came to mind a lot whenever I was thinking about denialism.
No, absolutely. And then for those of you who don't personally know me or who don't watch our YouTube, so you can't see me.
Well, for the record, you should watch our YouTube so you can see us, especially Jazz. She's way cuter than I am.
No, we all cute. But yes, the YouTube is uncut, unedited. But for those of you who can see me there, or if you know me, I am part Black. And so yes, that's one of those things where it's like, I feel like people on the other shoe who obviously wouldn't get it, it's like, that's extremely hurtful and harmful when people do that and be like, well, this person, it's like, how are you using someone else to invalidate a whole experience of people and also act like my feelings like don't matter and aren't important? And yes, I think, well, I don't know what these people are thinking, but people often do something like that to totally just belittle like a huge cause of what's going on. I saw so much stuff of people just trying to say things like, well, you know, this didn't really happen and that's not a big deal, and like just playing the race card. And it's like, no, like you don't get it, like, and you don't want to get it, and you don't want to understand where we're coming from, because you know, like we were mentioning, you pick something that's going to go with your narrative and you run with it, and that's your example.
Right, exactly. Because that example is way more comfortable than facing the fact that I have white privilege and racism still exists. And because then I have to face a whole bunch of other uncomfortable things, basically. So I'm going to stick with Candace Owens, who says that it's fake.
Exactly. One person.
Yeah. But that's such a good way to put it. Like, why? Because I feel like that is what happened, right? It was taking what she is saying and saying, well, since she said this, what you're saying doesn't matter and isn't true. And it's kind of like, but that's so, what's the, like, that's like a defeating argument, because what you're saying is that this one person said something which makes this other person not true. And it's like, you're just using one person against one person, like that. That doesn't, no,
it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, that doesn't add up. And especially whenever it's like, yes, that is one person, and there's also a ton of other voices that are saying very different things. And I'm not trying to like pick a fight with Candace Owens or anything in this, not that I think she listens to our podcast. But it's like, she's allowed to have her opinions and I'm not taking those away from her. But I also have to say that, like, you have to, if you're going to allow her opinion, you also have to allow that opinion of everyone else too, especially people of color, even if it's uncomfortable and it doesn't agree with what your narrative is.
Exactly. Where it's like, yeah, like you said, it's like, I'm not saying she can't talk and she can't say her part, but let's listen to her. Let's listen to a lot of things. Let's look at the histories. Let's look at the statistics of how things are happening in this country. I can't really speak on other countries. I don't know how Black people are doing in other countries, but for the history of this country, like, there's a lot going on and there's a lot still going on. And to deny that, and that's the thing, I feel like, you know, it spiraled into so much that was going on. That was like such a hard time for me personally with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter, because then it was just a bunch of people, of course, saying racism doesn't exist, it isn't happening. I'm like, well, maybe it's not happening to you.
Right, exactly. And that's like, I don't know, that just, I can't imagine how much it bugged you, because it really bugged me, but I was kind of like, why are you getting to say that racism isn't happening whenever you're white?
Yeah,
you know,
it's like,
you don't get to make that call.
like, come on now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it is. It's trying to just make it all go away and kind of sweep it all under the rug, because it's too hard to face. But that's the thing. It's just like what you said earlier. If we don't face it, It's hurtful, it's harmful, it continues without being checked. Like that is the actual reality of the situation.
Right. It's like, let's try to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Let's face those hard truths. And that's the big thing. Like, we can't create a better future if we don't just deal with what's happening or what has happened.
Exactly. That reminds me of things that I say to my clients all the time. Like if you're coming in and you're telling me that you have, anxiety, depression, nightmares, whatever you're coming into for, but yet you don't want to look at trauma, abuse, I don't know, and like any of those things. And I'm not saying focus only on the past, but it's kind of like some of those things have to be resolved for you to move forward. And or not have to, but it really helps moving forward if we're resolving those things. And so it's how are we moving forward in our world as a society, in humanity, if we're not looking back and seeing like, hey, I wonder if those things affected how we think now. Because yeah, they do. They definitely do.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Plot
do.
twist. Plot twist. It all shaped you. Every single bit. Yeah, exactly. But we could just act like part of it didn't happen and just pick out the parts that we're uncomfortable with. Sure. That sounds like a great plan. Yeah. I don't know. That was one of the other examples that came to my mind. So I don't know if any other ones came to your mind, but.
Now that's a good one. Yeah, for the big one for me, like I said, was the climate change. And like I said, the Holocaust one, that was news to me because I had never heard someone denying that. I didn't know that was a thing. That was it's, and I can't even imagine how those people are dealing with knowing like, for them and their ancestors and having like people in their family who have dealt with that and people act like it doesn't exist. I can't even imagine that type of pain.
That's like, did you know that people don't believe that Sandy Hook happened, the shooting?
I recall when this all happened and the level of conspiracy theories on the parents are fake and it's all a scene and acting. And
did we watch that video in college?
We might have.
I feel
I'm trying to think. I was getting like
I feel like we watched that video, which I'm a little bit ashamed that we watched that video, but I think it was just showing like, what in the world are these people like? And it just, I kind of always ask myself the question of like, okay, what is like, if this is fake and this happened, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean going forward? How does that affect everyone? Versus, what if this is real and people are saying it's fake? How does that affect people? Because if it's fake and people are acting like it's real, okay, then people might have guilt because they're acting like their kids are dead, or I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
But like, if this is real and people are acting like it's fake, you're literally invalidating people's kids being shot and dying.
Exactly.
Like losing your child.
Traumatic, like young children, these families. And that's the thing. It's like, you can literally sit here and watch these parents cry and bawl their eyes out because they lost their child. And you're like, fakers, actors.
Yes, because it makes you more comfortable, because it's uncomfortable to watch someone losing their child, having lost their child and bawling over it. It's uncomfortable. But like you said, let's get comfortable sitting in that, because it is uncomfortable to lose a child and no one should make them feel like they can't be uncomfortable or bawling because they lost their child. But I feel like that is just such a good example of denialism too, because now I'm remembering that video and why did I watch it and showed it to you apparently, or we watched it together. I don't know how we found it, but like, why are we picking out? Because I think I remember it was like, oh, these parents do like these acting cues, and like this is like the statistics of like the shooter, like how many were injured versus killed or something. And it's like, okay, you're picking out two random small things and saying that invalidates the entire experience. Like, are you kidding me? No, that's denialism. Get used to the being uncomfortable.
I feel like, and it's one of those things where it's like, you really have to kind of check yourself, because like, if you're feeling that uncomfortable, before you start spreading, misinformation and lies and this hatred from your own denialism, why don't you just take a step back? Like, just shut the TV off until you're ready. But like, you don't have to spiral out of control.
Right. Ask yourself some questions of like, what does this mean? How am I feeling about this? What was I feeling watching them talk about their loss? Because maybe that's telling you something.
Mm-hmm.
It's just now that I'm thinking of too many examples that are just
the things. I feel like
sad.
A lot of this starts, well, I'm probably just making this up. This is not a fact, but I feel like a lot of this stuff starts really with just like conspiracy theories. And then it just spirals into these fake facts. And then it's just so widespread and maybe that's another thing, especially with like conspiracy theories, where so many people are just so being like, well, I just want to see what it's about. And then, like you said, where it's like, you kind of just get looped into the story of it all.
Right. Because I'm pretty sure that's why I watched the video, because I was like, I don't know. There's like people said that there's a conspiracy video on it. Oh, I have shame. But I'm okay. I'm going to get used to being uncomfortable. And I admitted that I watched the video and I acknowledged that Sandy Hook was real.
Right. We watched it, but we made better choices.
Yes.
We saw what we saw, and we had the understanding of what's real, what was fake, what was made up to make us think certain things.
We looked at both sides of the argument and made a logical, rational decision based off of the data.
Exactly.
Yeah. That makes us sound smarter and me feel less guilty. Is that denialism since I feel less guilty now? I'm not sure. I don't know. I just feel like I think that's part of the reason that this topic interested me so much, is because after I read that article about the residential schools, it just made me think about how prevalent this is and how uncomfortable we are with negative things. And that was like, don't look up. Like, remember they were talking, like the newscasters were like, oh no, we don't talk about those things because those things make people sad. And it's like, sometimes people need to be sad.
Exactly. And they're like, well, we just like to keep things lighthearted. And it's like, well, life isn't always lighthearted. Like, that's not exactly what's always going on.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I hope y'all learned a little bit about denialism.
Yes. So remember, guys,
with the rest of us.
Remember, it's okay to look at both sides of the story, but really look at the facts. What's the proof? Where are your sources coming from? Make those wise decisions. And really just remember, the history is what it is. The past is the past, but we can use it to move forward. So, even though denial is a coping mechanism, let's just try to think of what can we do with this information?
Yep, exactly. Couldn't have said it any better. Thanks for listening. Hope you learned something.